October 27th, 1940, was the last day of the New York World's Fair. It was a crisp, clear autumn day, a steady wind blowing in from the northeast. The fairgrounds were crowded. Few people went home for dinner that night. It was hard to believe no one would be here tomorrow. The fair would disappear, and except for the aquacade and a few other structures, the fairgrounds would remain silent for the next 25 years. The world of tomorrow had been a wonderful diversion. But if you lived in New York, hey, there were lots of ways to have fun. New Yorkers have always cherished their time off, and there were wonderful places to have fun. Some were nearby, some far away, and some were on your own block. One of the best playgrounds was just a subway ride away. Coney Island's amusement park owners didn't fret much about the closing of the World's Fair. Except for the period during the war, attendance had been growing and growing.
The reward would come on weekends, Saturdays especially. Folks would give us $1, $1.50. We'd go to Coney Island. Now this was an emotion. Coney Island was an emotion. It wasn't just a place. It was part of our bodies. It was part of growing up. I mean, my entire boyhood was spent weekends at Coney Island.
Children who lived in the surrounding neighborhoods never seemed to tire of the attractions. Even those kids visiting Coney under the watchful eyes of parents returned home with tales of adventure and daring. When it came to escaping city life for a while, no other place offered such exciting variety.
There were three groups that actually went to Coney Island. There were the beach people, they went to the sand, went swimming. There were the boardwalk people, and there were the amusement people. And usually those three groups didn't mix at all.
The beaches from those days, you almost had to stand. There wasn't enough room to sit down. But we loved it.
On the boardwalk, hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers reached into their pockets, wallets, and handbags for money to buy tickets and treats.
Underneath the boardwalk was sometimes a gold mine because people would drop things, you know, drop jewelry, bills, and of course you find $1 bill and that's enough to take you a whole day through Coney Island.
As a teenager growing up, we used to go there sometimes instead of going to school, spending a day at Steeplechase Park and going around the barrels and the slide, and then of course the horses that ran around the outside of the building.
Steeplechase was an amazing assortment of rides, practical jokes, and entertainment. The Lifesaver Candy Company had built the parachute jump at the World's Fair. It was such a hit that George Tilliou had it taken down and moved to Steeplechase Park.
There's nothing higher in the world than the parachute and the fright and the fear. And that's something that will never, ever leave anybody who's been on that parachute ride with that little metal seat, with that little, I think it was a bakery string they used to tie around you. That's what it seemed like. Nothing was holding you on but fear, and just you held on to this thing. And I remember hitting the top and then going down, and the whole world was beneath your feet.
There were so many different forms of entertainment at Steeplechase that even the little clown from the Blowhole Theater had more than one job. The yearly beauty pageant drew thousands of contestants. The young and the not so young competed for the coveted title of Miss Modern Venus.
Coney Island was a very important part of my growing up, socially, sexually. It was really, it was sort of a license to touch skin, because you were protecting somebody.
The remnants of Coney Island's glorious past aren't hard to find. Although the thunderbolt and the tornado no longer leave our hearts pounding, Coney Island hasn't disappeared completely.
Anybody driving up Surf Avenue hits the cyclone first.
It took me until I was about 18 years old to get up the nerve.
We'd pay for one ride. But then, because Anita screamed as we went down each dip, very loud, that drew more passengers, if you want. So therefore, they'd say, no, you stay on, have another ride. And we'd get 4 or 5 rides until we felt like getting off.
I'm wondering now if I really screamed because I was scared or just because I liked your attention. I'm not sure.
I like to think it's the second thing, but who knows?
On Tuesday evenings during the summer, Coney was always packed. At dusk, the show began. Down the beach from Coney, you could enjoy a quieter day by the sea.
After my husband left, and he was gone for 2.5 years, all of the girls used to hang out together. One of the things that we used to do, the girls who were left at home, would be to go to Rockaway Beach. I sent a lot of what we used to call cheesecake pictures to my husband who was overseas. I wanted to make sure that he remembered me.
Over the years, the Rockaways grew into a summer bungalow community.
We lived in Washington Heights where it was hot and dark and ugly, and most years we were taken out of school around the 15th of June and we headed straight for the beach. Once we reached the Rockaways, you could park the car and just go everywhere on foot. We had 2 bungalows back to back. The front bungalow was my aunt Evelyn, my Uncle Ben, and 2 kids, and my grandparents. We lived in the back bungalow, myself, my sister, and my brother, and my parents. In between the 2 bungalows was a courtyard, and in the courtyard was where life happened.
My kids had to have the beach because I had it when I was a kid and they needed it too.
Besides, it was cheaper than sending the 3 kids to camp like I would have to do.
The main reason we didn't go to the country was because our husbands were working. And living at the beach, they could come home every night.
All men that came home from work that night had a towel, got into their shorts, and they went in for a dip in the ocean. And it just sort of, am I right, Al?
Right.
Am I right?
You became more relaxed.
That's right.
We went to the beach every day unless it rained.
In the afternoon, card games provided a little friendly competition. Pinochle for the guys and canasta or mahjong for the ladies. And dinners were always memorable.
My mother made,
Kashavarnichkas,
yeah,
roast beef,
gedempfte Fleisch.
roast chicken, brisket. Those were all, and Mom did all the
latkes.
cook. But her greatest meals were Sunday afternoon when my uncle went fishing. and brought home flounders.
Early evenings were spent with friends on the boardwalk or just pedaling through the neighborhood.
We made our own entertainment. We had a television, but we rarely watched it. On the weekends, relatives would come out, and there was always somebody who sang or played an instrument.
Labor Day was a special day out at the beach. Everybody, every house in every corner, there were block parties. You were saying so long to your neighbors. Even sometimes you said, well, I want to stay an extra couple of days.
And you didn't
Labor
stay.
Day night, you looked out the street, all the lights were out, it was dead. You just, come on, let's pack up and get the hell out of here.
Most New Yorkers couldn't afford a bungalow by the sea. Coney Island was nearby, but it was usually crowded and noisy. But if you had a car or $1 for a round-trip fare, you could get to the greatest beach in the country.
Jones Beach was the Riviera of Long Island. It was the most beautiful beach with the most wonderful sand. Everything was elegant. It was like what you saw in the escapist movies at the theaters, right there in your own backyard.
The shoreline offered near-perfect conditions, sparkling clean water, and waves that you could ride all day. The pure white sand was warm and comfortable. Back then, the beach seemed to go on forever. There was plenty of elbow room, even on weekends and holidays. Robert Moses provided us with more than just sand and surf at Jones Beach.
Every afternoon, the softball stadium is the scene of hotly contested league games for the Jones Beach Championships. Prizes are awarded at the end of the season to the top teams. Archery is another sport that is especially popular here with both children and adults. No prizes for marksmanship, only the satisfaction of planting an arrow in the bullseye. On the land side of the boardwalk rambles the unique 18-hole pitch and putt golf course. Even true golfers enjoy playing this undersized links, for the putting greens are well tended and ringed with traps of seashore sand. To those who prefer their athletics to be more leisurely, shuffleboard offers pleasant diversion. For one thing, here is a game where it is practically impossible to lose the ball.
For the kids, an amazing variety of services, play areas, and even cultural experiences.
Rosebud, a full-blooded Sioux princess, is an expert on both Indian customs and children.
Oh, Jones Beach was a wonderful place to be. Strict enforcement of the laws. You didn't dare drop a piece of trash on the beach. You were zapped away by the police. Everything was pristine. The pools, immaculate.
Three cafeterias and a beautiful dining room offered food for every palate, from kosher hot dogs to a swordfish steak smothered in dill sauce. And at the end of the day, well, sometimes the bus looked like the best way to go. But if you stayed late, evenings were always something special.
Jones Beach wasn't just all swimming. They did have dancing under the stars, and that was twice a week. One night it would be Ed Durlacher, and they had square dancing, and he called the squares, and the other times it was regular social dancing. But it was a wonderful, wonderful place.
Long Island's fabulous natural resources inspired the building of many state parks. Beautiful parks where you could find every imaginable form of recreation.
My family went to Wildwood State Park and Sunken Meadow. Now from Richmond Hill, this was a very long ride. My parents used to pack breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
It all started after World War II. That's when they bought their cars. There was no Long Island Expressway. The only way you could get out to Lake Ronkonkoma, those places, was by going with the Vanderbilt Motor Parkway.
What I love about Lake Ronkonkoma is that it's a small town, and I think anybody who grows up in a small town just loves it and wants to stay. My husband's grandfather started the beach by building the first pavilion, eventually built a number of others. And they, of course, became a mecca for many people from the city, Queens, Brooklyn area, who would come out in buses or in private cars just for the day. And there were 1,000 things to do. Most of the activity, of course, centered around the lake because that was the mecca for a lot of people. And there was swimming in the summertime and lots of equipment like slides. You had to really be courageous to go up those steps and go down that long slide.
We used to go swimming there up until the 4th of July. But after the 4th of July, we had a lot of city people that came out, and they had strange ideas and dress code, and they used to wear bathing suits.
The pavilions on the lake were long and wide. They held hundreds of people. During summer and fall, performances, dances, and holiday celebrations entertained both residents and visitors.
The fire departments provided a lot of entertainment during those times. In the town of Brookhaven itself, there are 20-some-odd fire departments, and every one of them had a parade or had their own fair.
They had the Ferris wheel, the merry-go-round, the booth set up, and they have a car raffle, usually a Buick, and always, not just sometimes, always somebody from Brooklyn would win it. Nobody ever out here won a car.
Back then, the bays and the ocean were teeming with schools of fish. Party boats leaving from Sheepshead Bay, Freeport, and Captree always seemed to be filled with an interesting cross-section of New Yorkers. If catching a sailfin or a giant tuna was your dream, then there was only one place to go.
Where we came from, in the Bronx, we got tenement houses, and this trip that we took, it was just like going into another world. It was a trip that went for hours and hours. We rented a house called the Mallard Inn. It was by Durier's Lobster House up on a cliff overlooking Montauk. And just to get up and smell the ocean, the smell of the fish, it was fabulous. We saw things that we never saw before. We saw whales and huge turtles, and that's why we went there every year. We went on a boat called the Sea Queen, and Captain Stanley Blados, I'll never forget him. And as we were fishing out there, which I did often, the water was so rough. I caught huge fish, sometimes huge fish. And just to see these boats when they come in with the fish, I mean, they're bigger than people. The family, they would be at the boat watching me come in, and here I got 5 kids. Yeah, Daddy, oh boy, look at the fish Daddy got. It was great.
The trips out to the island were memorable, but before you knew it, it was time to pack up and head home. Back to the work, the crowds, and the busy streets. If you needed a break from the hectic pace of city life, but didn't like sand in your shoes or the salty spray in your face, you would head north to the mountains. But getting there was no small feat.
There was 3 ways of transportation. You had a bus, and if you were wealthy enough to own a car, and you came by railroad.
The railroad was an important part of the culture of the vacationing traveler who came to the Catskills. They would take the ferry from Manhattan to Weehawken. And at Weehawken you would board this railroad, which was the Ontario and Western, and those of us who lived up there either called the Old and Wobbly or the Old and Weary.
The dirtiest, filthiest train in the history of transportation. If you wore a white flannel pants, by the time you got to the mountains, it was black.
Going by car was usually an unforgettable experience. But if you didn't have a car, you could always let someone else do the driving.
I had a job of driving what we called a mountain hack, a hack. They're usually 7-passenger cars. They were held together with Scotch tape because you couldn't get parts. We'd make a little prayer that we'd go get up there without breaking down, because if we did, we were in big trouble.
I think one of the jokes, and they still make them today, about the hack drivers who pick you up on 86th Street and Broadway, and then you would go and you go to Brooklyn, and then you come back, and then they'd pick somebody else. The last person they picked up was 85th and Broadway. And they really were characters in their own light, in their own world.
I used to start in Brooklyn. We used to charge $3.50 a head to go up to the mountains. There was no quick way, there was no throughway. And part of our prayers that we wouldn't pick up children because they either had to pee or they had to vomit, and they complained constantly. I don't feel well, I don't feel well. You'll feel better, you'll feel better. So also, I was a doctor at the same time.
It was a long, hot ride, and the trip took most of the day. But at the halfway point, you could stop and recharge at a marvelous oasis called the Red Apple Rest.
The Red Apple was a restaurant, cafeteria, roadside stand that served everything from probably the best hot dogs I ever ate to omelets, to roast beef sandwiches, ice cream cones.
The Red Apple Rest was where you stopped for a nickel hot dog and a nickel soda and the restrooms, and you could stretch your legs because you knew you had another 3 hours of climbing up the Wurtsboro Hills ahead of you. And that was a difficulty given those cars and overheating and problems.
And at the very foothills of that hill was the town of Bloomingburg, and they had a gas station and a diner that was combined. Had a great sign that said, "Eat here and get gas."
It was life. It was real life, what life was supposed to be, with laughter, joy. The experience of coming to the mountains was great.
Hitchhike up to the Catskills. We know the highway, Route 17. We're gonna hitchhike up to the mountains, up to the brightest resort we have seen. We're gonna hitchhike up to the Catskills while we are singing a merry tune, and we'll get married up in the Catskills, and we will then have a real
New Yorkers wanted to get away from the rat race, but not from their friends. You kept a sense of community by taking the whole family, or a group of families, to a bungalow colony.
In the summertime, our parents would take us to the bungalow colonies. Sometimes the family would spend the whole summer up there, but Dad would leave early Monday morning to go to the city to work. You didn't see your father till Friday night.
It was like taking the neighborhood on vacation. And if you wanted even more of a communal experience, you stayed at a kuchelein, a Yiddish word that means cook alone.
I used to come up with my family. We would stay at a kuchelein. That was where you had little bungalows or a house. You just had a room, and then there was a kitchen with like around maybe 20 refrigerators. And you all had your own refrigerator or part of a refrigerator. You bought your food and you did your own cooking.
They used to fight for positions because they all used to like to be near the icebox so they can grab the stuff and start cooking and everything. There'd be maybe 12 families in this one place. But it was so enjoyable with all the hardships and everything, being in the country.
Going to the mountains meant upstate, New Jersey, or Pennsylvania. But New Yorkers had a special affection for the Catskill resorts.
The whole idea was to keep the guests happy, to do everything in the world to make them forget everything but the fact that they are in this marvelous state of euphoria, the Catskill Mountains.
A week in the mountains meant a non-stop whirl of activities.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Here are a few suggestions for your afternoon's activity. At 2:45 this afternoon, out on the Grossinger Ball Field, our weekly guest staff baseball game will take place. And at 3 o'clock at the first tee of the Grossinger Golf Course, golf pro Joe Tenessa gives another of his weekly group golf lessons.
We used to have social staffs. These social staffs comprised of singers, dancers, choreographers, scenic designers. We used to put on shows.
And then they had these games, icebreakers, because it was a single crowd. And you got pretty chummy when you passed the balloons between the legs from male to female, or passing the oranges from neck to neck. And the staff was told in no uncertain terms, if there are any young ladies unoccupied, not dancing, your job was to go over there and keep them occupied.
My legs used to hurt at the end of an evening that's unbelievable. Every dancer had a dance. And the more I danced, the more the owner would say, dance more, dance more.
Side together straight and...
The staff helped set the tone, but part of the charm and personality of the resorts came from the guests.
Well, you know, by the pool, you usually get these little older men that just sit around. And I remember coming down, and I said to the man, I said, how's the water, how's the pool? He says, lukewarm. So I get to the diving board, and I dive in, and it's freezing. So I said, are you crazy? You told me the water, it was lukewarm. He says, it lukewarm to me.
We would have some kind of a musical production, have 30, 40 people on the stage, all from the guests. Now, I would interview them, and the first thing I'd ask them, I said, can you sing? They said, no. I said, good, you're in the show. But the big event that everybody looked forward to was the mock marriage.
We used to take the biggest guy, dress him as a lady, and the skinniest little woman or girl, and paint her up with a mustache and heavy eyebrows, and we make her the groom.
And people would get dressed up for the occasion, just to be part of the merriment. And we'd have the band play the wedding march and so forth. And then they used to throw all kinds of things at the bride. They didn't like her. We had a lot of fun, a lot of fun.
For families, summer in the Catskills was a time for everyone to be together. And if you were single, you went to the Catskills for romance, and maybe to find a mate.
Chewanga had a reputation of being a swinging place. I was just curious. I mean, I was a nice little Jewish girl from the Bronx. What did I know from swinging? But I went up there with a girlfriend, and I found it was very nice. There were a lot of college fellas, college students, and my mother had told me, I want you to find a doctor. And where else can you find a doctor but in the Catskills?
A lot of people came up there as virgins and didn't quite leave there that way, men and women. It was like a really, but it was a different kind of a grouping. It wasn't, the wildness was a happy wildness.
I saw his picture on a wall. I said, who is that guy? He's cute. On Friday night, I see him sitting on the couch. He looks very familiar. He's the guy in the picture. So I looked at him and I went like this, and he went to me, you know, and I said, yes, you. He came over, and the rest was history.
Marriage wasn't the only dream pursued. Some dreamed of standing in the spotlight.
We went to the Greenwood Inn, and they had a talent show, and they said, hey, why don't you get up and do a song? And I sang, and I loved it, and they loved me. And I was quite shocked about this because I had found something new in my life.
I used to sit in the booth, and I used to hear the finest comics, the finest singers, and then I became infatuated with show business because all of a sudden I started to copy the comics gags, but one thing I did was that I made sure that the gags suited my style of personality.
You want another loser? Yes, sir. A woman who puts her bra on backwards and it fits. You want another loser? Yes, sir. And remember this one, men, a man whose wife loves to have sex in the back seat of their car, and she wants him to drive.
Lou Goldstein was Simon Says. He took the children's game of Simon Says and made it into one of the funniest times that anybody had at Grossinger's.
Hold it. Hands down. Uh-huh. Simon said hands down. Who didn't make one mistake yet? Raise your hand. Now you're out.
Many of America's favorite entertainers got their start in the Catskills.
But have you watched kids lately? No kidding. Have you watched them grow up? They're soft inside. They got nothing. Kids are crazy nowadays. Everything is psychology, psychology. Kid burns down a living room. They say, don't touch him. That's initiative. And I want to tell you, grandparents, they're worse than anybody else. They spoil those kids like mad. I went to see the nephew, 4 years old, with my mother and dad last week. All day long, they stood around yelling, look at that boy. Look at that boy he's doing. Look at that boy he's doing. What do you think the boy was doing? Sawing a dog in half.
In the mid-40s, television had come about, and people were no longer satisfied with having entertainment from the social staff. So we would book different entertainers for every single night. That's when we would have people such as, well, Eddie Fisher was discovered at Grossinger's.
When I was at Grossinger's, people thought I was a waiter or a busboy. I was hired, not hired, I was told to sing with the band every night in the terrace room.
And then Eddie Cantor had come up to the hotel, and he heard Eddie Fisher sing, and he took him on his tour, and as they say, the rest is history.
Someone's painting the leaves all wrong this year. Wish you were here. And why did the birds change their song this year? Wish you were here. They're not shining the stars as bright. They've stolen the joy from the night. Wish you were here. Wish you were here. Wish you were here.
The Catskills were known for having the best entertainers and the toughest audiences in the country.
It was this ground for growth. It allowed you to experiment. It allowed you to touch people. And if it wasn't right, they'd let you know. Because one thing about their errors, boy, they'd let you know. Nobody was shy about telling you they didn't like something.
They knew a good joke when they saw it. They'll go out and do a joke you think is great. 10 guys did it ahead of you. And they look at you and they say, well, what the hell is he doing? He's doing yesterday's material.
The audience's attitude was, go ahead, entertain me, you know. And if you were good, they went wild about you. And that, but if you know, you couldn't be lukewarm. It's either nothing or you're in, like Flynn.
Something magical was happening, and everyone wanted to be a part of it. For a time in the 50s, everybody who was anybody came to the Catskills. At its peak, the region boasted hundreds of resorts, with names like the Laurel, the Pines, and the Tamarack Lodge. But for most people, the Catskill experience could be captured in one word: Grossinger's.
Grossinger's was the multinational hotel. Grossinger's was world-renowned, and it had everything under the sun.
And it was really an era of elegance. People really dress them. I mean, in the evening, especially Saturday nights, women wore the long gloves and the evening gowns, and the men had their dinner jackets.
The people coming to the hotel would come with trunks of clothes. Even if they stayed for a weekend or two, they came with 6 suitcases. They changed on the hour. They had an outfit for tennis, but you couldn't wear that to the dining room. You had an outfit for the pool, and you changed in 3 bathing suits in the daytime. You didn't wear 1 bathing suit. At night, maybe they'd wear one gown to the cocktail party and dress differently later on in the evening.
But more importantly, Grossinger's meant food, and lots of it. A lot of people saved all year for their vacation, and they wanted to savor every single bite.
Of course, lunch and breakfast and dinner were the 3 biggest activities. Because when they checked into a hotel, they would say, "What room do we have?" And you say, "Well, your room is..." No, where's the dining room? That's the first thing they wanted to see.
Because they were up there, they paid for it, and they wanted doubles. And what else do you have? Side dishes. Oh, side dishes, there's something. Side dishes. Everybody had side dishes. I don't remember ever going home from the Catskills without a heartburn. I mean, I had a heartburn when I was 15 years old.
Holding it all together was one remarkable couple, Harry and Jenny Grossinger.
Most often, people, when they speak of Grossingers and think about it, they speak about Jenny, my mom. She was an incredible woman. She would go through the dining room and greet people, and then in later years she would sit on a stool at the dining room door and say goodnight to everybody.
Harry Grossinger only came into the dining room on Friday nights. And as the guests came in, he spoke with an accent. He says, "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, good Shabbos. My name is Harry Grossinger, and I hope you are having a good time."
I learned about life in the Catskills. Catskills were a very, very important part. I think probably more important than New York University.
And it was really like a great big summer camp. And it was a wonderful era, an era that will never, ever be recaptured.
I love the Catskill Mountains. I love every inch of it, every tree, every branch. And many times it brings tears to my eyes when I go through the countryside and I see these closed hotels. And I stand for a moment and I muse, gee, what a difference it was.
Some of our earliest memories of the countryside are from when we went to camp for the first time.
We would meet at the 92nd Street Y and go up on buses to the camp. It was quite scary to be there the first time. When you're 7 years old, it's very young to be away from your parents. What you hated was the inspections. You had to have your bunk in perfect order or else you would have like demerits and such.
At camp, we slept in cabins or tents with 3 or 4 other kids. There was no electricity, and the bathrooms and showers were never nearby.
What I immediately did was set up a buddy system so that if any one of us had to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, you had to wake your buddy.
Camp was a time to grow and learn.
Many of the things that I know to this day, I learned as a child at camp. To play volleyball, softball, to go rowing. I remember passing the swimming test with the other campers cheering me on because I was struggling for those last few laps.
Picture I have of Roy Silva, my first counselor from 1938 and 1939. And remember him well, and I saw him probably 4 or 5 years ago, which was 50 years later, and still looked the same.
One of the highlights was Parents' Day, when all the families came to visit. Mom and Dad would bring care packages with all the goodies you'd missed.
My first summer at camp was in 1957, and I then spent 5 summers there in all. Lost all contact with camp until the summer of 1985 when I sent my own children there. The first time back after so many years, the lake still looked the same size. The feeling was as though I had never left.
Back then, we went on vacation for maybe a week, or longer if we were lucky. But most of us spent our free time close to home, enjoying neighborhood pleasures.
My life was centered around Sunnyside Park. There was always baseball and football and tennis and just hanging out. The football team, we used to call it a semi-pro team. They played other teams from Astoria and out further in Flushing and so forth, and would travel, so to speak. About, I guess we were about 15 or 16 when the girls decided that they wanted to get in on this. So we set up our own cheerleading group. We didn't really know what football was all about. Sometimes we were cheering for the other team. and it was a lot of crazy fun. But it got us with the boys, and that's what we wanted. And some of the people got married, lived there, brought up their children there, and are still there.
Simple fun was part of growing up in New York. I didn't think too much about the various amusements. We just did things. And it was free. It was accessible.
And no matter where you lived in New York, there was always that special hangout. Games to play, and good times to be shared with others. A few activities seemed to develop universal appeal. In nearly every New York community, you could find a loyal group of fans.
I love to go roller skating. It was a good place for a guy to meet a girl. Inexpensive date. Sessions prices were like 35 cents admission. And it was just a nice place to be. You had live organ music, and everybody would meet their friends at the roller rink. In the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, before television was a major influence, everybody went roller skating. It was a very, very popular sport, and we had over 27 rinks in the New York metropolitan area. It was just a very popular sport where you could get a bus or a subway and go from rink to rink and come home 2 o'clock in the morning. It was really fun.
For most of us, the streets, sidewalks, and parks of New York were the places where we put on our first pair of roller skates, stood up, and, well, did the best we could do.
This is the typical street skate of the 30s, 40s, and 50s. It has steel wheels with loose ball bearings, and you would use this old-fashioned Chicago skate key to tighten up the clamps on your shoe, and you would strap it on around your ankles, and you'd go away skating on the sidewalks or the asphalt of the city of New York.
Here on New York Central Park Mall, finalists in the annual Journal American Wing Skate Derby vie for honors.
The most fun was roller skating in the street. And I I didn't even know that there was such a thing as a roller skating rink.
Years ago, outdoors, you would play tag and jump over the manhole covers and race around the street and play games. It was really fun. Outdoors, you were unregulated. You could go and do it whatever you want. But indoors, you had the floor guards who were just like traffic cops out in the street. They wore military-style uniforms, and they would make sure that you didn't race or that you did obey the rules for a safe skating session.
In 1939, Earl and Inez Van Horn began teaching roller skate dancing. A few years later, thousands of New Yorkers were dancing with their partners instead of just simply doing the rounds.
When the board flashes couples, the dancing begins. Simple, graceful, rhythmic. Dance skating highlights every session. Wow, watch those jitterbugs cut loose.
During a time when fun and recreation didn't have the complexity and hype we see today, New Yorkers made the most of simple games. Bocce was played in alleyways and in parks. Out in the Hamptons, you could bowl across a finely manicured lawn. But rolling a ball down a hardwood alley drew the most fans.
In 1948, when I first started, we were cigar smoking down the basement, kind of back alley kind of situation. It was very, very funny. But the truth of the matter was that it was strictly a bunch of guys chomping at the pipe, going to do some bowling, and bowling in leagues. It was a very serious matter, and it was very, very intense kind of a situation.
I started bowling with the New York Telephone Company League, the fellows I worked with in Bayside. I was a repairman, and I had the obligation to take care of the customer first. Well, you never saw work done so fast on Friday. Friday nights was bowling.
During the 1940s and 50s, there were thousands of bowling leagues in New York. Out on Long Island, the Industrial Bowling Championships were dominated for over 20 years by 3 companies: Liberty Aircraft, Republic Aviation, and Grumman Aircraft.
Bowling was a tremendous source of entertainment in those days. There were leagues and alleys all over the place. And with a 180 average for 1 year, I'll be honest about it, 1 year only, but I was invited to join 3 or 4 of the leagues.
Many of our dreams of fame and fortune were spurred on by our local heroes.
He began with the big 4, the 4, 6, 7, 10. Andy had his own special technique for this shot. And he said he'd like to have the American Bowling Congress adopt it so we could all improve our averages. Next, Andy showed us what he called his drop kick. He said he calls it that because most of the time it drops in the gutter. And it sure didn't this time. He got a spare.
I had some good bowling partners. We would go into the bowling center, challenge, get on the microphone, ask the desk to challenge anyone in the house after the league was finished. And the bets were anywhere from $20 to $50 a man. And the money was pretty good.
As long as you won.
As long as we won. Yeah, that's true.
My first venture into the bowling business was always with pin boys, and pin boys were the only form of pin setting that we had in the bowling business until the early 50s.
At the end of the day, you'd throw down a nickel or a dime, a line that you bowled, down the gutter, and the pin boy at the bottom end would kind of pick up all of his tips. And then you never saw who they were, but you knew they were back there because they were the ones who made it happen.
Now, anytime you've nothing to do, get up, get out, go bowling. It's easy to bowl and a lot of fun too. Get up, get out, go bowling.
The advent of the pin setter, the entire world, we revolutionized the entire game. Suddenly, we were bowling in the mornings with ladies, in the afternoons with children and schools, and so on and so forth. And then a great social explosion took place, I think, with male and females joining together in a fun league.
Bowling. Freddie Fitzsimmons down in Sheepshead Bay, right? On Saturdays. And it would be like 10 cents a line, right? And we used to go with all the boys, and we used to look at the girls, because the girls would go, and they'd make believe they weren't watching us, we'd watch them. And I'd throw 99% what they call gutter balls.
I found that more boys, but more girls, joining mixed leagues and having more of a good time, mixing together, having some competition, particularly if the females were beating the males, and then everybody was practicing and trying to outdo the other. And there was a lot of touch, there was a lot of feel, and a great deal of spirit.
Parents who had suffered through tough times were also eager to make life easier for their kids.
If there's one thing a young man wants, it's wheels, cars. And my dad, when I was about 17 years old, said, stay in school, you're gonna get yourself something beautiful, I got a present for you. The first car is a feeling that you can never, ever replace. It stays with you all your life. I was the king, and I drove up Kings Highway, windows down, AM radio blasting. And you know what's funny? You almost had an obligation. You almost were forced to move and leave the neighborhood. So this was the first time that I wanted to get out of my neighborhood. We'd all split $1 for gas. In those days, you could get all the gas you want. It was like 29 cents, 30 cents a gallon. We'd put $3 of gas in there. We'd be able to cruise, and we'd go out to Long Island. I mean, that was a major thing. That was scary. We had to look at maps. I mean, we planned it like we planned a trip to Europe now. We'd go out and meet some of the girls out in Lawrence or the 5 towns. That was a biggie, to go to the 5 towns. Going out with someone in the 5 towns, you really had to make it. Used to go into one of those old drive-ins and get a burger, get the best greasy fries you can get in a milkshake, served by somebody called a car hop in a very tight, short skirt and they always had gorgeous legs, and they always had a nice smile. Can I take your order, sir? It was expensive in those days. I mean, hamburgers were 15 cents. I had Blue used to go, about 50, 60 cents. You'd blow half your allowance.
It was the era of the drive-ins. Just down the road, you could park the car and see a movie.
They used to show these horror movies that never made it anywhere else. They were there at the drive-in.
We all went to the Sunrise Drive-In, and we put 4, 6 people into a car. 2 usually hid, sometimes in the trunk, but not that often. And we would go in and under the pretense of going to see a movie.
They had to stick the big speaker up on the window of the car. And sometimes it was a heavy metal thing, and it would break the window sometimes, crack the window of the car.
They had a show, which was nice, but the main feature was that you got to sit with your girlfriend in the dark, nobody paying too much attention to what was going on.
My family never mentioned sex. Victorians never mentioned sex, and that's what my family was, prudes. I still remember 4 words whenever I went out the door: now don't get fresh.
Whitestone Drive-In. Yeah, that was wonderful. I don't remember any movie that was ever playing there. It was a make-out place, and you'd get comfortable under the steering wheel or in the back seat.
We were too shy, though. Nobody knew how to get this thing to work. They didn't know, the girls didn't know. They wanted to play, they wanted to neck. I mean, that's as far as it went, some heavy petting, some necking, but we were too shy.
Many of us ended our evening at one of Jan's 22 ice cream parlors, a favorite meeting place for teenagers. It was a great place to cool off after the heat of the drive-in, the only place where you could share a kitchen sink.
It was a great era of exploration, of growing up, of experimenting and doing new things and meeting new people.
It was the we generation. Hey, let's do this. Won't it be fun to do this? Let's go to the ball game. Let's play stickball. Let's go to the lots. How about bowling? How about a good movie? Let's go to Coney Island. Let's do something. We did things together. We, the we generation.
I think people were sweeter. That's what I liked about it. And I think young people were inclined to be more innocent. Maybe we were too innocent, I don't know. But somehow that's a very fond memory.
it was a time and a place at a point in our lives that is sacred, and it's beautiful.
In the years between the two World's Fairs, a generation of New Yorkers went to school, went to work, found time to play, and lived life. We hold those times, those places, and most of all, those people in fond memory. To all those folks we miss and all the good times we shared, wish you were here.